I mean, for it to be a colonizer romance, I think the whole entire story would have to be focused on the romance between the colonizer and the colonized. Hello everyone, it's me Krista, also known as your academic rival, and today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different from my usual content. As you may or may not be aware, there is currently a lot of controversy and criticism aimed towards To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods by Molly X. Chang. To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods is a fantasy book inspired by Chinese history and culture and follows our main character, Ruing, as she decides if protecting her family is worth betraying her people. So I first heard about the book after all the drama with Kate Corain, like if you know, you know. And so I added it to my Goodreads. So I was like very shocked when just like a month after its release, there was already a lot of like 1-star reviews about the book and basically calling it a colonizer romance. So after seeing so many low ratings and 1-star reviews and videos on YouTube critiquing the book, I decided to check the book out for myself and see if any of these claims held any merit. So first I will begin by going over all of the most common concerns and criticisms that I saw while going through the Goodreads reviews. And then I'll get into some things that I noticed whenever I read through the book and what I see to be the biggest issue in the book. So of the most common concerns listed by reviewers were the fact that the book was seemingly a colonizer romance, that it romanticized toxic relationships, that it was sympathetic to colonizers and or colonialism, that it was a simplification of genocide. There are also concerns that the book exploited the tragedies connected to World War II and Unit 731 as a whole. There are also concerns that the author failed to properly address oppression and colonialization. All in all, I don't think the author was trying to sympathize with colonizers or that she was trying to like simplify the genocide that went on. I think that she just picked an angle to write the book from and that it might have been not the best angle. This is also the author's debut novel, so I just don't think that she also has like maybe enough experience under her belt to kind of tackle such heavy topics, especially from kind of the angle she came at it from. And besides those reader concerns, I also had like my own like personal criticisms of the book, but my criticisms were honestly more stylistic. In general, I wasn't the biggest fan of the author's writing style, and not exactly just the writing style, but also the sentence structure itself. Like I know that kind of just sounds like hating, but like I feel like maybe since English isn't the author's first language, and she has mentioned that she learned a lot of English from reading Cassandra Clare's books, I think that that might have really contributed to the kind of weird sentence structure. I also did have a problem with the world building in general. I felt like it wasn't clearly explained, even though the first 20% of the book kind of felt like it was a big info dump. I feel like I really didn't understand the concept until I read the whole entire book. Lastly, there's also the characterization of Ruing. I didn't have too much of a problem with her. I did see her struggles and I was able to empathize with them. Yeah, she didn't make the best decisions, but if you read the author's note, you see that like that was kind of the author's intention, was to make this morally great character who did sometimes have to make bad decisions that might not have been the right decisions, but that the main character thought were the best decisions. So while I did not agree with every single decision that the main character made, I completely understood why she made those decisions. So I did think that the author tried to make Ruing like a morally great character, but I think she kind of like fell a little bit short, and in turn just ended up making her a little bit unlikable for a lot of people. And lastly, I do think the book failed to kind of live up to its theme of anti-colonialism, but I think this is just because of kind of the way that the author approached it. And I think the author's approach is what made people think that the author was trying to be sympathetic to colonizers. But just a disclaimer, I'm not making this video to bash on the author. Instead, I'm actually going to be making this in support of the book and the author, and I'm just going to be addressing some topics that looking through the discourse for this book kind of made me think about. So in a lot of the reviews that I read, a lot of people just kept saying that it was a colonizer romance, and I just kind of wanted to address that. Like, obviously this is just my opinion, and that's why I guess I'm gonna do the disclaimer right now that everything in this video is just my opinion. There's no right, there's no wrong, there's no fact. So all of this is just my opinion. It's just the way that I view the book and really the author's intention. I'm not bashing on the book at all. In fact, I'm actually going to be supporting the book. So basically, I'm just going to give my opinion on why I don't think this book should just be written off as a colonizer romance. I think there might have been an issue with the marketing of the book, which led to so many people just calling it a colonizer romance. But at heart, I feel like there is so much more going on, and that if we really look into the relationship between our main character and the supposed love interest, we'll see that there is so much more going on that should be looked at as something that's so much more deeper than just a colonizer romance. And I also noticed that a lot of the bad reviews and low ratings came from people who like didn't read the book or DNF'd it 20% in, or were just kind of going along with what the general consensus was. So I just want to say that it is important to read books before you review them. Like, I understand the DNFing and making a review based off of your thoughts and opinions of the book, but for those who rate a book before reading it, I just don't think that's fair to the book or to the author, or really to the practice of book reviewing. And yet another disclaimer, honestly, this book is going to be full of so much spoilers. I'm going to have like actual quotes taken from the book, and I'm going to be going on about certain events that occurred in the book in detail. So if you haven't read the book, I mean, you might not be planning to read it at all, but I just want to let you know from the get-go that there's going to be spoilers, and just be prepared. I think it's important to take these quotes directly from the book so that I can kind of support some of the claims that I'm going to be making in this video. And so it's just not possible to make those claims, support them with evidence, and not spoil the book. And this is going to be my last disclaimer, I swear. But just to let you guys know, I'm not saying that this is not a colonizer romance, because obviously there is a colonizer and there is the colonized, and there is a bit of a romantic link between them. Obviously that cannot be denied. There's feelings going both ways. I think the main point I'm just trying to make is that just because something is quote unquote supposedly a colonizer romance doesn't mean that there's no merit to the book. I don't think the author is trying to romanticize colonialism or any of that. I think that she just tried to bring to life the story that is honestly a very real reality in times of colonialism, that sometimes women have to do what they have to do in order to survive, even if that means forming relationships of whatever nature with their colonizers in order to get the benefits that come with that relationship. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that that was just a reality of the times. So that's why I'm saying I don't believe that the author is trying to romanticize the relationship between Ruing and Antony as the colonizer and the colonized. I don't think she's romanticizing that at all. I think she's just bringing attention to the very real reality of colonialism. So I think the book has two major problems that are already like affecting people's perspective of it before they even read the book, like the entire book itself. And number one is marketing, and number two is the author's note. So first I'm going to go into the author's note just to give a little bit of background information. So in the author's note, the author mentions that this story, To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods, was first inspired by the stories she would hear from her grandfather. And it wasn't until after her grandparents' death that she did more research and she realized that his stories were actually stories of the Japanese occupation of Manchuria and of Unit 731. So that's why the whole entire topic of Unit 731 and the occupation of Manchuria already casts like a dark shadow over the book. And I think it's important to note that this book is, yes, inspired by World War II and like the occupation of Manchuria and by the horrible experiments that went on during Unit 731. While the book is inspired by that, there's so much more to the book that shouldn't be ignored. And yeah, I do believe that there is some simplification of the genocide that took place and really of the whole entire occupation. But at the same time, this is a work of fiction that is just inspired by those events. And also, I think a major contributor to the issue is that in the acknowledgments, the author says that she's been writing this book for 8 years. But then in the author's note, she mentions that she's only known about Unit 731 since I think 2020, after the death of her grandparents. So I think that maybe some of the book was already written, and then she kind of went back and added that aspect of Unit 731 as a bit of an afterthought, maybe. I mean, obviously, like, that's not something that should be taken lightly or seen as an afterthought, but just because, like, it did play, I will say, a limited role in the overall story, and that's why I feel like some of the criticism is not completely warranted, just because Unit 731 did play such a limited role in the story to where you could tell it kind of seemed like an afterthought. So that's why I understand the criticisms of oversimplification of history. So that's why I think it's so important to keep in mind that the story To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods is just inspired by the occupation of Manchuria and by the horrors of Unit 731. I think it's kind of unfair and a little bit impossible, actually, to draw a line between fiction and historical inspiration, and that just becomes like very limiting in what we can do as authors and as storytellers. And while the author should have maybe approached the topic in a different way, I also think that it is important to remember that this is also just a work of fiction and that it just takes inspiration from those events. And since it's not a non-fiction work, it doesn't exactly have to hold true. And so while I do think that the author has a responsibility to maintain certain elements of a historical event that their work is inspired by, I do think that they also have artistic liberty and that they are free to use that as they wish. Although obviously that does bring up another like ethical debate about what is proper to do whenever you are including certain historical elements or figures into your work of fiction. And I do think that we have the right and the freedom to use historical elements and figures in our work of fiction, and really to use as we see fit, because if we think that we can just kind of decide what someone can or cannot write about, I think that that's now bordering on the line of censorship and taking away someone's freedom of speech in a way. That's why I just really don't think that any of us are in the position to tell the author what elements of history that they can be inspired by and how they can be inspired by those elements and what elements they can use and the ways that they can use those elements. I don't think that it's right to make that decision for them, especially when the author is using not only like inspiration from historical events, but also inspiration from what she has learned from her grandfather. So I think she retains her right to make the creative decisions that she has made, and I don't think that we should be judgmental of those creative decisions, just because I think that just opens a whole nother can of worms that really there is no answer to. So while some may like it or they may not like it, I think the author still has that freedom to do with her story what she wants to do. So I don't think that we can really come and police her work when it comes to that. So we can just judge it based on our enjoyment of it, and I think that's really kind of it. I think the second area that failed this book was marketing. I think that because of the general trend in romantasy that is very popular right now, I think the author and her publisher, and perhaps even her agent, I don't know, tried to really cash in on the hype, and also on the hype of certain ships. So the two ships that the author mentions in like her TikTok posts are very popular, and with the new Avatar film that just came out, I think that might have also been another reason to kind of mention those ships, just to add more hype, and then to tell people, okay, if you're a fan of this, you may like this as well. But in general, I think that the way that the author approached marketing of the book and the certain keywords and tropes that she used kind of failed this book before it even got in people's hands, because now they already came to the book with preconceived notions about what it was going to be about and the way that the author was addressing those themes. So while in marketing, she may have marketed this book as a romantasy with like a romance between our main character Ruring and obviously the colonizer Antony, or like from enemies to lovers, forbidden romance, or two lovers from opposite sides of a war, I think that those phrases are very buzzworthy. They create a lot of hype, but at the same time, I don't think that they're accurate for this book, just because this is not supposed to be a romance. I don't think that romance was at the forefront of this book at all. I don't think that the romance is what this book is about at all. I don't consider this book to be a romance book. I don't consider it a romantasy at all, just because I believe if the author took out any trace of romance, you would still have a complete book that I feel wouldn't be lacking. So that's why I don't think that this could be really considered a colonizer romance, just because the romance plays such a limited role in the story. You could literally take it out and still have the main plot. So that's why I feel like using terms like colonizer romance is kind of doing a disservice to the book, just because that's not what the heart of the book is. And I think that is the point that a lot of viewers are missing, just because they're looking at this book, or really they're going into this book thinking that it's going to be a romantasy, thinking that it's going to be enemies to lovers, it's going to be forbidden romance, and then so they read it and they see the elements of colonialism, and so that they think that this is like really a colonizer romance, but in reality it's just showing the lengths that women go to survive in times of trouble. So that's why I think marketing really did a disservice to this book, and the whole marketing of this book is responsible for, I think, people's preconceived notions of it, and the way that they perceive the book, the romance, and the characters themselves. And I think that idea that the book is going to have like these star-crossed lovers or this colonizer romance aspect to it makes them overlook the themes of anti-colonialism. Also, this book is the first book in the series. I think it's going to be like a trilogy, so I think that this book is also supposed to be like setting up the whole entire like story. So I think while the overall arc of the story, the whole trilogy, is going to be a piece on anti-colonialism, I think this book was just setting up the conflict. And so I think that's why a lot of people don't see the themes of anti-colonialism, just because they haven't read the entire arc of the book. And plus, while the main character is so against the colonization of Pangu, we really don't see her fight so much against it, because in the beginning, yeah, she is fighting on the side of the colonizers because she thinks that's going to save her family. So while in the background, she's literally saying that she knows what she's doing is wrong, but it serves her purpose. Like, I think that's where a lot of people get confused, and why they see the author or the main character as being sympathetic to colonialism, while in reality, she's just trying to survive. But in the end, I do believe that the theme of anti-colonialism comes through a little bit stronger, and that's in anticipation of the next books in the series. So that's why I think it is kind of important to kind of go into the book a little bit more open-minded and not just seeing what you're looking to see. Just kind of looking past your expectations and really trying to read the book for the story that it's actually trying to tell. Because I think the story that the book's actually trying to tell got lost in the hype about it being a colonizer romance, which again, I just do not see this book as being a colonizer romance at all. I mean, for it to be a colonizer romance, I think the whole entire story would have to be focused on the romance between the colonizer and the colonized. So I don't think the book is focused on the romance between Ruing and Anthony. I think it's focused on the relationship between those two, but not on the romance. I don't think that relationship is purely romantic. In order to get the most out of the book, I think it's important to really understand the character of Ruing and of Anthony. I think we have to understand them as characters, understand their motives, and understand what they're willing to do in order to achieve their goals and how they go about achieving those goals. So first, I think it's important to understand that Ruing as a character is not driven by romance. She's not driven by love. She's not driven by affection for Anthony. I think it's important to see first and foremost that she sees love as a privilege. Ruing is very concerned with the safety of her family, and that is her main priority. In her mind, she's not driven by love. She's driven by survival. Once you see that Ruing is driven or motivated by survival and by safety, protection, stability, all those great things, you see that she's not really searching for love. If anything, she's searching for validation. And that's what I'm going to get into a little bit later. Right now, I'm just going to talk about the importance of survival to Ruing and also emphasize the fact that Ruing sees love as a privilege. So that's why I can say that she's not driven by love, and that's why love doesn't really dictate how she interacts with Anthony. It's all about survival, okay? And so first off, we know that Ruing sees love as a privilege because first of all, she says it, like, I'm gonna put a picture. She literally says love is a privilege. And so to her, marriage is seen as a way of achieving stability and safety. Through marriage, she can ensure that her family has the supplies like firewood to make it through winter, and she could also make sure that her family has protection from the Romans. So her and her family are not pursuing marriage because she wants to be in love or because she loves someone. She's pursuing marriage in order to protect her family. So from the beginning, when the book first begins, her grandmother is already searching for a husband for Ruing in order to protect the family. So that's her main goal, is protecting the family and survival of the family. But obviously, whenever she meets Anthony, now he provides her family with the safety and stability and resources that she was looking to achieve through marriage. So at the same time, she's not forming this relationship with him like out of love. It just comes out of need. I mean, this girl is even prepared to move to the freezing north to get married in order to make sure that her family's safe. She sees marriage as a sacrifice for the survival of her family. And throughout the book, her grandmother, and then later her, Ruing, constantly says, nothing good ever comes of unprotected girls in wartime. So this is another kind of push to get married in the beginning, and then to form this alliance with Anthony. And then also, Ruing actually sees her getting married as actually helping out her sister Maya, just because Maya shows no interest in getting married or really even in men, possibly alluding to the fact that Maya could be queer. So I think that's also important, that she sees marriage as this sacrifice, not only for the sake of her family overall, but just for the sake of her sister's conscience. And the importance that Ruing continues to place on survival is also seen not only in the way that she's willing to betray her people and side with the colonizers for the sake of just her family. It's also seen like in every page of the book. It's like honestly pounded into you just so that you really understand that she's not betraying her people because she loves Anthony. She's betraying them because she loves her family. So I think that's an important aspect that a lot of people are missing, that like if this was a colonizer romance, she would be betraying her people because she loves the colonizer. She's not betraying her people because she loves the colonizer. She's betraying them because she loves her family, and it is only through forming a relationship of whatever nature with this colonizer can she protect her family and furthermore herself. So once again, in reality, I think that the whole reason that this is even considered a colonizer romance is because the marketing plays so heavily on a supposed romance between Ruing and Anthony that it automatically makes people think that Ruing is betraying her people because she loves Anthony, when in reality she's betraying her people because she loves her family. So I think some people aren't even able to see that just because they are so focused on the relationship and the romance between Ruing and Anthony. And also, I think a lot of people kind of overlook what the author tried to do with Anthony to show you that this is not supposed to be a colonizer romance, like at all, because Anthony himself is actually gaslighting and manipulating Ruing the whole entire time. So if this would have been like a regular run-of-the-mill colonizer romance, then the love between the colonizer and the colonized would have been kind of pure or true. The relationship would have stemmed from them growing a love for one another despite knowing that they're on opposite sides. So in reality, I don't even really consider what Ruing and Anthony have to be a romance just because it is so one-sided. Another issue that I had with the marketing was it marketed it as he falls first, but in reality from the beginning Anthony is just gaslighting and manipulating Ruing in order to use her power to achieve his goals. So that's why I'm saying that I just don't see this book as a colonizer romance, just because the place that the romance comes from isn't like true love or falling for one another despite who they are. From Anthony's side, it's just that he has a goal that only Ruing can help him achieve. And then from Ruing's side, it's this overwhelming need to survive and to protect and provide for her family. While also, I think it's also important to mention how vulnerable Ruing is to Anthony's manipulation. So I think number one, we need to look at the way that Anthony presents himself. I use the phrase presents himself because this is not Anthony's true nature. He only presents himself to be this way in order to cause Ruing to have feelings for him so that he can manipulate her. You don't manipulate those you love, and you have to love someone to have romance. So it's not a colonizer romance. In the even though I would say it does have aspects or elements of a colonizer romance, it's not a traditional colonizer romance, and it's not intended to be a colonizer romance. The author, she's not trying to highlight the romance between the two. She's really highlighting the lengths that Ruing will go to protect her family. And if she thinks that forming this alliance or relationship with Anthony is going to accomplish that, then that's what she's going to do. She's not around Anthony because she loves him. She's around him because she needs something he has. So it's important to note that from the very beginning, Anthony is presented as the lesser evil. And once again, this is not the author, or in my opinion, this is not the author's attempt at sympathizing with the colonizer or sympathizing with Anthony. It's just really setting the stage for his manipulation. That's what I believe the author's intent was, as by framing him in the way that she did in comparison to the rest of his family. So the first time we even hear about Anthony, she's already saying that of the three brothers, he's the one who never comes beyond the fence, maybe because he's disgusted by the Pamyanese people. And then the very first time we see him, he's on the streets and there's like a girl whose mother just died, and she has like a sign saying that like she's basically selling herself in order to pay for her mother's funeral. And so he comes and he gives her a coin, and in reality that could be seen as an attempt to sympathize or to create sympathy for Anthony, as maybe he's not the bad guy. But in reality, I mean, Anthony has all this money, so what's given a single gold coin to this poor girl on the street gonna do, and how does that prove that he's a great person? But in Ruing's mind, she just sees that and already starts to form her own opinion of him, regardless of what was really going on in his head or regardless of the reality. Ruing even says that she saw like astonishment and awe and wonder on his face whenever he saw her use magic, and that it wasn't discussed. So just because he already showed a bit of interest in her magic, she is already feeling complicated feelings within her, but that's because she has this need for validation and not because she truly loves this guy. And she may think that she's growing feelings for her, but I don't think those feelings are genuine or that they're coming from the right place. I think that they just come from a lack of love, a lack of validation, and a lack of affection, and he's using that to get what he wants from her, basically. And then Anthony constantly distances himself from his grandfather and from his two brothers and from basically the Roman elite in order to create this narrative that he's not the bad guy. And that's why you'll see him say that, and then you see Ruing saying that. And she's not repeating this shit because she honestly like believes. I think she's trying to force herself to believe it. But in reality, if you spend so much time with someone, like for there's this whole 6 month time jump, and for those 6 months it's just been her and Anthony. So he's telling her all this stuff and filling her head with all of his ideologies, and she's already so naive and impressionable. And I think I'm not taking away her agency at all. I'm saying that she does have responsibility and she does have agency and she has her own mind to think, but I think that her judgment is clouded. So I think that's an important distinction for me to make now, is that while I do believe that she has agency, I also believe that her judgment is clouded. However, that may affect her use of her agency. And then Anthony is also constantly using Panganese. It's the language of the people in the story, like their native language. But like, so he's constantly using her language and using like different proverbs in order to show that he is such like basically an ally, and trying to constantly convince Ruing that he has her best interest at heart and the best interest of her people and both of their worlds at heart, when in reality that's just a ploy. He's just using his knowledge of her language and her culture and her history in order to frame himself as the good guy. That's also like why he constantly compares himself to his father, who was known for appreciating the natural beauty of Pangu. And then Anthony also inserts himself as kind of a buffer between Ruing and the Roman world, and and by doing that, he kind of sets himself up to be kind of the white savior, and that he's gonna come and he's gonna bring peace to the world, and really fills her mind with the idea that only he is capable of doing that. And that is why she becomes so attached to really this romanticized version of Anthony and of his abilities, just because he's constantly filling her head with these ideas about what he's going to do and the ways he's going to save both of their worlds and the ways that he's going to act as like a protector. And so I think it's also very crucial to take note of the way that Anthony is presenting himself, and also the way that he's presenting himself is very planned, is very premeditated. And the more he learns about Ruing, the more he can kind of tweak his image of himself in her mind in order to get her to do what he wants. So basically, he just establishes himself as kind of the world's only hope, or the world's last hope. And he paints himself as this kind and relatable figure, especially after he tells Ruing more of like his backstory. And he paints himself as like this tragic hero. And I think that also causes Ruing, not the author, to have a lot of sympathy with him and to really kind of believe in this vision that he has of a world in which their two worlds can exist and can exist peacefully. And he also continuously tries to paint himself as someone that Ruin can draw comfort and strength from. This is seen from like the very first time when she breaks down after he literally like makes her like kill someone, and she breaks down and he's the one to comfort her, when in reality he's the one who put her in that situation. So that's why it is like I'm not exactly sure what the correct term is, if it's like Stockholm syndrome, or like I think that's more sympathizing with your abuser, with your abductor. But in a sense, she feels that she is abducted by this man. Like, she doesn't feel she has the freedom to leave. So in reality, he can be seen as an abductor and she as a kidnapped. I really don't know what to call it. If you know what to call it, then just leave a comment down below. But he's creating situations in which she's going to need comfort and she's going to need like support and like a well of strength to draw from. And then he paints himself as that support, as that comfort, as that strength, as that kind figure that is reliable and relatable. And I think that this irony is kind of lost on a lot of people. Like, he's literally using this as a tactic of manipulation. And that's just why I just don't see this book being a colonizer romance. Just because there's no romance. There's like, obviously, like there's romantic tension, whatever you want to call it. But in reality, that's just manipulation. So also this kind of like goes hand in hand with like not only being a colonizer romance, but with this book romanticizing toxic relationships. In reality, the relationship between them is not romanticized. It's literally painted as this bad thing. And this author constantly shows that Anthony is a bad guy. He's manipulating her. He's gaslighting her. He's literally manipulating her. And the author is showing us that. And she's not romanticizing the relationship between them. She's drawing attention to the tactics that he's using in order to accomplish his goals. So that's why I don't think that this book is romanticizing toxic relationships at all. So once you see the way that Anthony like presents himself, you kind of see how that feeds into the way that he gaslights and he manipulates Ring. So I compiled like a list of like specific ways that he either like gaslights or manipulates her, and I'm going to like show you guys like quotes, like direct quotes from the book that I screenshotted to kind of like support what I'm saying, because I just think that like this element of the story is just going over so many people's heads, and they're so blinded by their want to see this as a colonizer romance that they're completely like kind of like, I don't know, blinded to the fact that he's just gaslighting her the whole entire time, and she's just falling for it because she is seeking validation and he's giving it to her. So Anthony constantly creates an us versus them narrative in order to receive Ruing's support. So Anthony constantly creates this us versus them narrative in order to receive Ruing's support. And this is not only like, he's not using it to kind of put the two worlds against each other, put like Pangu and Rome against each other. He's using it to put him and Ruing against basically the whole world, saying that it's on their shoulders to save the whole world. And so him creating this shared identity between them is kind of responsible for these growing feelings that she does have. And as I mentioned, like in the last segment, like the way Anthony presents himself, he's repeatedly distancing himself from other like unfavorable members of the family and kind of acting like he's the only thing that's holding back the tide. So I think that that also makes Ruing so dependent on him, because she thinks that he's the only thing that can stop war from happening or that can bring peace to the land. And so that's why she's already so shut down to joining the rebellion or working with the Phantom or like even like working with Baihu. And this unrealistic ideal of Anthony all comes from the way that he presents himself, because he's constantly trying to act like he's this like heroic figure. In reality, he's not. So this ideal version of Anthony that Ruing has built up in her mind is really based on the way that he presents himself and the way that he like constantly like acts like he's this like heroic figure who's going to save the world and make them both gods and make her name go down in history as a legend, a great legend. And really that's just a tactic of manipulation. Like that's his whole goal. And another form of manipulation is Anthony constantly giving Ruing the validation that she's seeking. I'm going to talk more about that in like the next segment, but just keep that in mind. It's like whenever you're reading the book, you come to realize that Ruing is this deeply broken person who's driven by a need to protect her family, but also by a need to feel understood and to feel accepted, because she doesn't feel that in her own family despite the lengths she goes to protect them. So I think it's important to note that Anthony constantly gives her the validation that she's seeking and tries to make her feel like she's important, like she matters, like she belongs. And that's why he does create this us versus them narrative, because it gives her a sense of belonging to say, okay, it's me and you against the world. And that's where she finds acceptance. And he also presents himself as being relatable, or they have like this shared trauma, kind of understanding coming from nothing and having to fight for your own survival. And that feeds into Ruing being able to see herself and her struggles reflected in him, and that brings her closer to him and reinforces the idea that it is them against the world. And part of creating this us versus them narrative and showing or trying to show her that she belongs by his side, trying to paint them as equals, but only in speech, because his actions make it very clear that they are not equals at all. Like, he's the one in charge. That's why there's this big power imbalance between them that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Like, and that's the thing, it's like Ruing's not, she might be a bit broken and her judgment might be clouded, but she's not the most stupidest person on the planet. She knows that there is a power imbalance between them, and she knows that they're not equals. But at the same time, she still falls victim to this us versus them narrative that he's constantly feeding her. And Anthony's actions show that they're not equal, because he constantly creates this environment in which she's not really allowed to disagree or voice her opinions, and she also doesn't have a choice whether or not she kills someone, regardless of how she truly feels about it. And then also he allows Dawson to continue to abuse her until the end, where you could tell maybe he does begin to grow some feelings, regardless of if those feelings come from a positive place or not. That is the only time you see him actually not allow others to abuse her. But just because he doesn't allow others to abuse her anymore doesn't mean that he's not abusing her. And as simple as it does sound, like, Anthony does use physical affection as a manipulation tactic. When you become so touch-starved, or you feel like you don't get affection from the people that you love or the people around you, people can use, especially like manipulators and like would-be abusers, can use physical affection as a way of controlling you, just like in the way that he comforts her. Like, that use of physical affection is something that she craves and something that she's not used to. So when she receives physical affection from Anthony, it creates in her mind that he's a good guy and that she can lean on him and that he will give her support and that he is a reliable figure. So he tactfully uses physical affection in order to manipulate her and in order to bring her closer to him. And I think that's kind of important. Some people kind of like overlook, I guess, or maybe even take for granted the importance of physical affection and kind of the difference receiving that from someone can make, and how being touch-starved can kind of influence the way you see yourself, and that when someone finally like gives you affection, you kind of fall for that person more, or you think more highly of that person because they're giving you something that you crave so deeply. And even if you want to crave it or not, it's a natural human craving. Like, we want to be accepted, we want to be loved, we want to be comforted. And some of that is shown through physical affection. And if you don't get physical affection, or if you didn't get physical affection a lot growing up, or like as a child, or even like in your relationship, and that's why you even see like couples using physical affection as a manipulation tactic. Like if you get mad at your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your significant other, whoever, like you're not gonna go hug them, or oh, you're sleeping on the couch. So withdrawing physical affection from someone is actually very harmful, and it's I would say a very effective tool, because it lets someone know when they did something right and when they did something wrong. And if they come to see physical affection as a reward, then that just prompts them to do those things that you deem acceptable or that you deem to be something good in order to continue to receive that physical affection. And it also creates a bond between you and the person who you crave that affection from, or who gives you that physical affection. And I think that that's kind of important to also note. Okay, so one of the most notable ways that Anthony manipulates Ring throughout the entire story is literally the way that he pushes his ideology on her, regardless of if that ideology matches his own actions or his personal motives. So you see that in the way that he creates this us versus them narrative, and the way that he paints himself as this heroic figure and only he can save the world. So basically he just keeps telling her like his perspective, and she starts to kind of internalize this and starts to see it as if this is the way that the world is, and she starts to take his ideology as fact. So you can see this literally start happening on the pages where she just begins parroting everything that he's saying. It's just important to know that she's not coming up with these ideas herself. They're all things that he's saying and that he's conditioning her to believe. And it's important to note that he's framing this ideology in a way that is very compatible to her own personal perspective of the world, and also places like just the way that like she sees the world, and the importance that she does place on survival and on her family and on basically coexisting, because she doesn't want war, but at the same time she knows that they've already kind of gone too far to return to the way that life was before the two worlds kind of collided, you know? So she's just looking for a peaceful way to kind of coexist. And obviously you see some of Anthony's like real thoughts and real beliefs, but I will say that they are exaggerated, and he frames them in a way that is easily digestible to Ruing and is very compatible to her personal viewpoint. Lastly, he uses her family as a bargaining tool. So it's said from the very beginning that the only thing that Ruing cares about is literally her family. She doesn't even care about her own like personal survival. She just cares about the survival, protection, and overall stability of her family, which really just consists of her sister and her grandmother. So he uses her family against her and basically admits to doing it. Like he keeps her family alive to make sure that he can keep her in check, and really to make sure that she has something to work towards in order to motivate her to maintain their relationship and this so-called alliance that they have going on. So while some may have read like Anthony taking care of her family, protecting them, providing them with extra money, like doing things to make sure that not only are they like surviving, but they actually have like a surplus and have the ability and the resources not only to like survive day to day and not like live in fear of the next meal or where their next firewood is going to come from, but also to where they even have the resources to do home improvement projects. So someone who's not reading too deeply into this might just see this as another way to make the reader sympathize with Anthony, or to think that he's being a good guy by providing for Ruing's family. But in reality, he's not doing that. They are a bargaining tool, and he's using them in order to maintain this alliance that he has with her. So all the different ways that like he manipulates and gaslights Ruing just really kills any potential for romance, and any romance that does come from their interactions, I feel like is not a positive type of love. It's not a good love. It's not true love. But I feel like the author does make that very clear with how obvious she makes the toxicity of Anthony, and like the fact that she's not romanticizing their relationship at all. She uses Ruing to constantly remind the reader that he's a bad guy, even though she can't deny the feelings that she has for him. She acknowledges that he's a bad guy. He's a colonizer. Like, his people have declared war on her people. She doesn't forget that for even a second. And so she's constantly reminding the reader, I feel like, that yeah, I might obviously have clouded judgment just because of how close and entangled I am with him, but at the same time, I have not forgotten who he is or really what he is. So that's why I feel like the romance angle, it's pure marketing, because in reality, there's no way you can really see the relationship that Ruing and Anthony have and classify it as romantic. I just honestly don't see like how one can do that. So obviously some feelings do grow between the two, but I think that's more of a result of the close quarters that they're in, because like for 6 months they're really the only people like that they're talking to. Like for sure Anthony is the only person that like Ruing is really talking to besides other Roman people. And so in that like kind of headspace where he's the only nice Roman that you're seeing, obviously she's going to have clouded judgment, and it's also going to make her more susceptible to his charms, to his manipulation, and to his narrative that it's us versus the world and that he's the good guy, because in that context he is supposedly really the good guy, I guess. Because in comparison to Dawson, who like electrocutes her, well, I know the main character electrocuted her as well, but like Dawson repeatedly does that whenever she's late to returning back to the Roman side of the fence. So comparing Anthony to Dawson to Valentine to the mysterious grandfather that's never actually like shown in actual novel, like Anthony does seem like the lesser evil. And I feel like presenting Anthony as the lesser of the evils does make some people believe that this is the author's way of sympathizing with them, but in reality I think it just shows that they're all horrible. Because if Anthony is kind of the lesser evil, what does it say about everybody else? Now that we gave a little bit of background into the way that Anthony presents himself and his gaslighting and manipulation tactics, I think it's also important to touch on the specific reasons why I personally believe Ruing is so vulnerable to his manipulation tactics. So I have like a couple points that I want to hit, and once again I'm going to show you guys where I found or what parts of the book made me come to this conclusion. Okay, so number one is obviously Ruing's need for a validation. I keep coming back to that, but I feel like that honestly explains so much, and I believe that that is also caused by her childhood and the way that she perceives herself, especially in relation to her gift. Like her gift is, yeah, she can kill people. And if you have a gift like that, you're blessed by, some people might say, oh, she's blessed by death, and some people might say she's cursed by death. When she's trying to form her own identity, obviously it's so entangled with her gift, and it really makes her question herself and who she is. And not only does her gift make her question like who she is, just like her gift itself, but also her relationship with her family and the way that relationship is influenced by her gift. Okay, so number one, I feel like it's the most like traumatic experience for Ruing is really the story of her birth. So we're told that her mother died in childbirth, like giving birth to Ruing and her twin sister Maya. And we also learn that Maya was like half the size of Ruing. So in her mind, she literally believes that like since she has the gift of death, that she brought death to her mother, and that she tried or almost successfully killed her sister, but Maya has the gift of healing. So she thinks that the only reason why Maya survived is because Maya has the gift of healing, and that's also why she's so small, because her gift was just honestly fighting. it was fighting against Ruing's the whole time in the womb. So in effect, she already thinks that she's basically cursed from birth. And then also this kind of creates this weird dichotomy between Ruing and Maya, as Ruing brings death and Maya brings life. So obviously when she compares herself to her sister, and you think about what society praises, obviously society praises life, it praises healers, it sees that as good, and it sees death and bringing death and illness and pain as bad. So if you really like look at it in that context, from the get-go, like from birth, she was already like looking for someone to validate her just because of her gift. And I think it's also important to note that Ruing has this desire to live up to her name. So her mother named her that because she wanted her to be brave. And that's why her name comes up in an argument between her and Maya says, "You don't deserve your name or your gift." And this really affects Ruing because according to her own personal philosophy, she sees life and survival as more important than bravery. That's why she repeatedly says, she pounds it into our heads, that heroes die and cowards live. And so that kind of like goes completely against what her mother intended for her when she named her Ruing. And so this creates this inner conflict for Ruing in the fact that she wants to be brave, she wants to live up to her name, but at the same time she places the importance of survival over that need. But she becomes vulnerable to Antony's manipulation tactics because he continuously gives her these words of affirmation. He keeps calling her brave. And if that's what she's been seeking her whole entire life, and this is the person who fulfills that need for her, it's kind of the same with the physical affection. She wanted physical affection. Well, regardless if it was subconsciously or consciously, she craved physical affection, and he gave that to her. And so that kind of goes into how she subconsciously or consciously desires to live up to her name. And him calling her brave, or saying you're the bravest person I know, and telling her that she is admirable, that fulfills that craving, that desire within her. And so yeah, it does make her look at him in a different way, because now he's fulfilling that deep need that she's had within herself since she was born and since she realized the meaning of her name. It's also important to note that Ruing feels a lot of guilt about the murder that she committed when she was literally 7. She was literally a child, and she didn't fully understand her gift. She didn't fully understand what she was doing, and she did it unwittingly. So not only was she overwhelmed with guilt for killing the kid, she was also ostracized for doing so. And I mean, obviously, what do you expect? And while she was never like formally punished or charged with the crime, the neighborhood kids all knew, I mean, really who it was. She's the only one with that gift. So, I mean, this kid just suddenly like dies. That's kind of strange. So they connect the dots and they believe, and well, they accurately believe that Ruing was the one who killed him. So now she loses all the friends she has, and then she also sees that they'll come by the house, but they're asked if Maya can come play, not her. So she sees her sister being included in those activities and her being excluded. So that also like feeds into this whole belief that she already has from like birth about her being bad and Maya being good. And now that's kind of being reinforced by like the act of killing this child and by being ostracized from her peers because she did that. So now she's very lonely. She has like no friends. Only people she has is literally her sister and her grandmother. And then in the story, she hasn't been on good terms with her sister for I want to say like 6 months or like a year. And then also to add to like to Ruing's problems is the fact that her grandmother doesn't like, I don't want to say doesn't appreciate her gift, but her grandmother encourages her not to use her gift and kind of encourages the thought within Ruing that her gift is inherently bad. So this is kind of like, I feel like what Elsa would have felt. I know it's so like out there, But like when it's like conceal don't fail, like I don't know. Like I feel like that's literally ruining. Like she's being taught that her gift is bad. She can't use it. All it's gonna be used for is literally hurting people, which yeah, it is death. So she's just gonna hurt people or kill people. So yeah, I mean, it is a pretty bad gift when you think about it. And so obviously it's not the gift that matters, it's the person who wields it, because that's the one who's gonna make the decision on how it's used and what it's used for. But at the same time, I think it's just important to note that like her grandmother and reinforces the idea that her gift is bad. And if her gift is a part of her, that means she must also be bad as well, just by association. And once again, we also have to note the fact that for 6 months, Anthony is the only one that Ruing is in close contact with, you know? So she comes from this lifetime of being like really ostracized from the rest of her community and only having her grandmother and her sister, but then also like having strained relationships with her sister, and then kind of taking this idea from her grandma that her power is bad and that she's bad. And then so now she's in close quarters with this man, Anthony, for 6 months, and he's filling her head up with these ideas. He's giving her physical affection. He's giving her words of affirmation. Like he's painting himself as this great guy, and she's falling for it because really, what else do you do when you're in that position? And now this becomes her new reality. Like you also have to remember, like you're not the same person you were 6 months ago. And you can say like, well, in 6 months I'm not gonna be this freaking homicidal maniac. Yeah, that's true. But just think, if you were in some kind of terrible position and something happened to you, like it doesn't have to be as drastic as being like kidnapped or like in a car accident, or like just any major change that happens in your life. 6 months later, you're gonna be a different person, you know? So she's just in this new reality because of her new environment. And I think that's also important to note. And the last two reasons why I believe Ring is so vulnerable to Anthony's manipulation tactics is because, number one, she's desperate as hell. She's really worried about her family. She knows that war is coming. She can feel it. She knows she needs to protect her family. And also, she has this lack of perceived power. So she knows she has this gift, but at the same time, she can't accurately wield this gift. She hasn't been taught, and at the same time, okay, she's taught not to use it. I'm not sure how true this is for the second book, but as of like the first book, Rui believes that the more she uses her power, that it's taking time off of her life. So that's also like another reason why she doesn't want to use it. So like, yeah, she does have a gift, she does have this power, but she has a lack of political power, financial power. So she really doesn't have a say. She really can't do nothing. So her world, her country, or her continent, her empire, whatever you want to call it, is facing a very big opponent. And really, she lacks the power to do anything. She has no political power. She has no financial power. She has no military power. She has nothing but her own gift, her own like power of death that comes from within her. But in the grand scheme of things, what can she really do with that? So her desperation and her lack of perceived power make her vulnerable, because they make her want to work with Anthony in order to achieve her goals as well. So I'm not going to go too deep into this next segment, just because I think it's already like very clear. But like the implications of this being like a forbidden romance is it's kind of questionable. If anything, I wouldn't market this as a forbidden romance, just because of the lack of romance in my opinion, and also the fact that the relationship between Ruing and Anthony is less of a forbidden romance or more of a power imbalance, you know? So I mean, while it does have the elements of being a forbidden romance, and because they're on like opposite sides of a war, he's a colonizer, she's colonized, like she's oppressed, he's the oppressor, like I think it's more important to like kind of just see it as a power imbalance. So even like marketing it as a forbidden romance is kind of where I feel like the team went wrong. And that's why I feel like so many people do place like such importance on the romance in the story, even though it's like almost non-existent. So to be honest, I think people just read a little bit too much into the forbidden romance elements of the story just because that's what was marketed. When in reality, I think that Ruing's and Antony's relationship is more characterized by power and balance. Like, I mean, even just going all the things we've said so far, like their relationship, they're not on equal standing. They're truly not. And yeah, you can say or you can argue that's what makes it a colonizer romance because there's going to be one who's oppressed and one who's the oppressor. And there is this power imbalance, you know? But at the same time, this story just feels so much different just because romance is not the driving factor. It's not essential to the plot. I mean, there's a relationship between the two, but I don't think it's inherently romantic. And even if it was a colonizer romance, you should have, like, I feel like good feelings about their relationship. And knowing that, oh, regardless of the side that the colonizer came from or the fact that he is a colonizer, you see these good parts of him. And that's why I feel like with colonizer romances, the author usually emphasizes the good points of the colonizer. And typically they're not really in a position of power. Normally when it comes to colonizer romances, I feel like they're always just like a citizen or like a part of the country that is doing the colonizing, but they're not ever like I feel like the agent of it or like the power, the force behind the act of colonization. And normally he can be sympathized with because he's not normally in a position of power. But in this but in this case, Antony is in a position of power. Technically, he does have the ability to do something about the colonization of Pangu, but he chooses not to. But he chooses to make sure that whatever the outcome is, that his country is going to receive the benefit overall. He doesn't care about her people and where they stand. He just wants to make sure that his country's good. But obviously he does like fall for her in the end. I do believe that he does, but I think it's just like a result of the time they spend together and the relationship that like grows between them because of that time spent together. But in reality, I don't think that his relationship with her changes his perspective of the country. And I feel like that's where traditional colonizer romances kind of differ, because normally the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized changes the colonizer's perspective of the act of colonialism and what they're doing. And they realize that they're the bad guy and that they're in the wrong. In this story, Antony never sees that he's in the wrong. He never considers himself to be in the wrong. He doesn't. And if he does, he says it's just a farce. It's just a way of trying to get Ruing to sympathize with him, to feel bad for him. But he doesn't genuinely feel bad for what he's doing or what his people's doing. And he's continuing to benefit off of it. And he's continuing to not use his political power to do anything about it. And that's literally what I feel like makes him and makes this story so much different from traditional colonizer romances, and kind of what I feel like draws the line and makes it not so much a colonizer romance, but just a tale of survival and of desperation and of manipulation at its heart. I don't see any real love between the two characters, so it makes it hard to categorize it as a romance, basically. But yeah, the power imbalance between the two is just like so much that it makes the supposed romance between them just really like unfair, into where it's not even a forbidden romance, it's just power imbalance. So first off, there's Ruing's lack of political power, and then there's the entire gender inequality thing going on. There's also the question if the relationship and the emotions are genuine due to the power imbalance and the manipulation that's going on. And also, Antony just continues to use force against her and also gives others permission to use force against her, which makes it feel like it's not romance at all. And Ruing overall, like her personality and her desperate need for validation, her need for stability and her pursuit of survival above all else creates this power imbalance as well, or really feeds into it. And lastly, we're going to get into the implications of the criticism. And also, I feel like the questions that the criticism raises. And number one, I just want to, like, first of all, start off by saying that all the criticism that this book has gotten is honestly, like, duly warranted. I see merit in each of the claims, except for the ones who, like, say that they're not going to read the book at all because it's a colonizer romance. Like, I just feel like if you haven't read the book, like, you shouldn't really be a part of the conversation on whether or not it is a colonizer romance, or if its portrayal of colonialism and occupation and Unit 731 or its inspiration. And I feel like you can talk about those topics and if the author did them right or not if you didn't read the book. So just going off of other people's, like, reviews is not enough to, like, fully understand what this book is talking about and the way that it portrays these certain themes. But yeah, for those of you who have read the book in its entirety and you have raised, like, comments and concerns of your own, I've read through them and I honestly see merit in each of them. I do see where you guys are coming from, and I hope you guys see where I'm coming from as well, because, like, I honestly, like, read the reviews and I respected those reviews, and I could literally, like, I was kind of like, damn, I mean, they got a point. I'm gonna be honest, like, I do believe that certain aspects of the book could have been done better. Like, I don't think that this is a perfect book at all. Did I enjoy myself while reading it? Yeah. Like, it was, like, actually, like, interesting. It was something new. But yeah, just knowing that a book has taken inspiration from some type of, like, historical event or, like, figure, or even if it's written in a certain time period, like, that makes you look at the book different, and it makes you kind of a harsher critic of the book, because now, especially if you know something about that event, that time period, or that figure, that historical figure, you're gonna be reading this book closely. You're gonna see, is this book accurate? Like, what liberty does the author take? How does she portray these events? Especially when it is something as sensitive as Unit 731 and colonialism and occupation and just tragedy. Like, you know, like, those are sensitive topics. So you do have a right as a reader to share your opinions about the book, to talk about how the author executed these themes and also how they handled, like, certain historical inspirations. And I think it's important to, like, kind of, like, yeah, like, have a critical eye when it does come to, like, reading. Obviously, there's a lot of books that you read just to be entertained. But at the same time, when an author does make such big claims about being inspired by something, you're going to read it in that context. And I think that it's important to note that, like, obviously there's a line between fiction and between reality. I mean, come on, you know? So while an author may be, like, inspired by something, that doesn't mean that they have to make it as realistic as possible. That's why we use the word inspired. Because, I mean, she's not writing this nonfiction book about people's experience in Unit 731. Like, this is not a nonfiction book about the occupation of Manchuria. This is not a nonfiction book about colonialism. It's just not. It's inspired by those topics. Yeah, it is. But in reality, I think it's just important to note that this book is just inspired by those topics and those events. That shouldn't completely color the way that we see this book. And it shouldn't, like, dictate how we're going to view this book. Like, we shouldn't view this book only in that context. Like, we should view it as a piece of fiction that was inspired by that, you know? And sometimes the author wants to remain true to the source material, and sometimes they take more creative liberty. And it's a spectrum. And does she fall, like, in the more accurate side of the spectrum? No, she does not. You know, and I think that's also okay. Because then if we get too deep into this, then it does start to become kind of like a topic of, like, censorship. And also, what stories are we allowed to tell? And how are we allowed to tell those stories? And it's like, sometimes we want to frame the story in a different way, and that's okay too. Like, you can't just make copy cutter stories, obviously, you know. And I thought this story was unique because I don't see a lot of fiction books that touch on these topics. And so it was interesting to see like some of that reality somewhat reflected in fiction. It was interesting. It should be entertaining. She's not trying to educate us about something, you know? So I don't think that we should take her depiction of her version of Unit 731 or colonialization or like these relationships between the oppressed and the oppressor as fact, and we shouldn't see this as reality just because it is fiction. It's inspired, but it's not reality. And this also makes us wonder if there's like certain limitations on sharing particular aspects of our culture. Like, what can we talk about? Like, and what can we not talk about, you know? So it's like, what's taboo? I mean, even in like fiction that is like inspired by like, okay, like African American history, or that's like includes like black characters, if it's like contemporary, then it's going to involve, like, most likely this is like so overwhelmingly present in media that includes black characters, is that if it's modern, there's always some element of racism or colorism, like sexism. Like, there's going to be like maybe drug abuse. There's going to be, oh, I need to make it out the hood, and the only way to do that is by selling drugs or like doing sports or rapping. And like, yeah, that is very stereotypical. But if you notice, like every TV show, I feel like every movie that like includes black people always has that kind of element in it, you know? Or if it's like historical, now it's just slavery. And that's what I feel like the only two sides of blacks that people see or that is reflected in media. Sorry, my camera died again. I think I need a new battery. Okay. But yeah, but just seeing like just so much black media that has to do with just like slavery or like post-slavery racism, I feel like it just sucks because this is the only media that like is supposed to represent us. So is this all that we're made of or all that we are, you know? And so it does suck when these are the only stories that like exist. So it is like a want or a need to see other stories. And I see this reflected in a lot of Asian media as well. Like, if it's a modern story, then it has to talk about how hard it is to be both Asian and American. Or now there's like generational trauma, or now there's like troubled mother-daughter relationships. So those themes are just so overwhelmingly present in Asian American media. And if it's like talking about the past, like there's only certain things that they touch on too, you know? So it's like I feel like sometimes we ignore certain parts of our history or our culture, and we try to see what people expect of us or the more easily digestible parts, you know? And so whenever it does come to like Asian history, like first of all, like Asian history is vast. Like, there's so many different Asian countries. Like it's not like Asian's not a monolith, you know? And I feel like that's where a lot of things get left like lost in, is coming to that understanding. And so that's why I think it's important to highlight different stories like this. And yeah, I mean, we should get more media that portrays like colonialism and Unit 731 and World War II in like a different light, and maybe as the main focus. But this wasn't the main focus of this story, but it was present, you know? So I feel like this is like Asian authors taking, I don't know, I feel like a risk in branching out from what is typically expected from them. It's something fresh, it's something new. It's not typically what we've come to expect of Asian media, of it being like, okay, contemporary, so identity crisis, or like a generation trauma, or like problems between like mother and daughter. And it's not something to do with like mythology and like, oh, we gotta have dragons or we gotta have emperors, and like it's not always that. That's not all that Asian history and Asian culture has. So I think it is so amazing to come up with these kind of stories that are new. These are stories that we don't often see, and I think it is important because I feel like through this book, I bet a lot of people didn't know what Unit 731 was. I bet they didn't even know that there was an occupation of Manchuria. I bet they didn't even know there was a Manchuria, you know? So I think this was a learning experience for a lot of people. And once they found out about it, that's when they became so outraged. And I feel like obviously the whole Unit 731, there's a reason why it has gone so unknown and flown under the radar for so long, because obviously the US had its hand in like making this freaking hush hush deal with the guy who ran it. So like, yeah, I mean, there is a reason why stories like this aren't mainstream. But I think it's important that whenever we do get stories like this, to appreciate them, even if they are bad, or even if they don't like show the topic in the way that we want them to show it. That means that maybe you should write a story that shows these themes in the way that you want to see them. And I think that this should inspire you. And I don't know, make you want to write something or inspire you to showcase a different side of your culture or your history. Because now that I'm realizing it, it's like, yeah, Black stories are overwhelmingly about either slavery or racism or like poverty. And maybe I want to show a different side of being Black and just show people that there's more to us than just our history as being enslaved or our present as being like marginalized and as having higher rates of poverty and incarceration. I think that we should show that like we have more to us than what society perceives us as or what the media portrays us as. And I think that's why it's so important to raise up these kind of stories that are just different and highlight just different parts of our identities and our past and just educate people, you know, even if like, yeah, it's not like it's not nonfiction, like I said, you know, she's not trying to educate people, but by showing this and by having the author's note that makes it clear what it is, well, now you know about it, you know, so now you can go educate yourself and become inspired, you know. And so that's why I think like these stories can act as catalysts to, I don't know, just make us want to do more and to inspire us to tell better and just inspire us to tell new stories that aren't already beaten to death so yeah. And also like I do understand like a lot of the criticism, like I do truly understand it. Lastly, I do want to talk about like sometimes Asian is seen as a monolith. So like in this story, like I saw like a review that kind of raised the concern that like, why is it Romans versus like a Chinese inspired thing when the Romans are supposed to represent like the Japanese people who actually did do these like horrendous crimes. So it kind of like, I don't know, like kind of implies that like Asians can't like do crimes against each other, or like that all of Asia is just one united landmass. Like that's not true and that's not reality. That's not fact, you know? So like I will say that yeah, like sometimes like when you do get stories and things are inspired by history. And so yeah, I will say that one negative thing about this book is the fact that it does kind of take away the responsibility, or it lacks an acknowledgement of the fact that Asians can abuse other Asians, you know? And it kind of does lay the responsibility on the whites, and it makes it this like this new battle of like whites against Asians. So it does reframe the conflict in such a way that it just does, I guess, like I can see why people say that it is like a bit problematic, but at the same time it is inspired. And then I also like personally I kind of question like the inspiration myself, because like in the acknowledgement she said she's been writing this book for 8 years, but she only learned about Unit 731 in like 2020. So then could it have been that originally the conflict was just Rome versus Pangu, and then the Japanese slash like Unit 731 nuance got added to it later? So I think like that's probably a big reason why like some people feel that the conflict was oversimplified and kind of like changed the reality and kind of made it this new conflict of like white versus Asian, and kind of ignore the fact that like Asians like are not monolithic and they can have conflict with other Asians. Like, I mean, there's a lot of countries like people can hate each other, like, you know, like yeah, so it does kind of like take away that responsibility. But at the same time, like I don't know what her original plan for this book was, so I can't speak on that. But I think that like her original plan may have been for it to be like Rome versus Pangu, and then later on added the Unit 731 aspects, and which is why I guess like the Asian on Asian crime wasn't addressed, because that wasn't the author's original intention. I'm not really sure, I can't speak on that, but that's just like my theory. So lastly, there is kind of the question of the commodification of POC history and trauma. And at the same time, because this story is like inspired by the stories that she was told from her own grandfather, I don't believe that she's trying to commodify or like kind of exploit like the trauma that like her family and like her people had experienced. I think she's just trying to bring awareness to it. But it does also like question like people's, I guess, intention when they do write stories that like are focused on the trauma or the traumatic experiences of people of color and like their histories, like especially when it does come to topics like colonialism and slavery. Like sometimes it does become torture porn, you know, when they're just like sorry, my cat is over there. Whenever they're just like sharing like the most traumatic and the darkest parts of like our histories or our cultures, like just I'm just saying ours, but like everyone's, like, you know, like it's not just black, it's not just white, it's not just Asian, but like everyone kind of shares or highlights the darkest parts or the most traumatic parts of their culture or their people's history. And like some people do it with the intent to make money off of their people's trauma or to like exploit those tragedies, and that's real. But at the same time, I don't think that that was this author's intention. But that's just my my opinion. You're welcome to your own opinion, but I will say in general it does raise that kind of question, you know. So like while like I don't think that that was this author's intent, I do think that the commodification of POC history and trauma is very real. So I think I was like yapping long enough. Like I don't know how long this video is gonna be. Like I don't want it to be like forever, but I just really had like a lot of things I wanted to talk about, because I saw all the criticism and terrible reviews that this book was getting, and I just wanted to know why. So I read the book, and then I just didn't think that people's perspective of the book aligns with the author's intention. And everyone has different definitions about what a colonizer romance consists of, and they have different definitions or different perspective of what this book is and the implications of what this book means and what it makes people think. And like, and I know there's so many more deeper things that like this book and what it does like kind of like implies, but at the same time, like I just want to keep reminding y'all that this is a work of fiction. It is meant to entertain. Like obviously, like I'm not gonna be rude or mean, I'm not trying to be nasty or anything, and obviously I don't know the future. Like I'm just here, I'm not a time traveler, I promise. But like this book, I just, obviously it's not going to be a classic. It's not going to be something that kids like study like in schools, you know. So at the same time, I don't think that it needs to be so politically correct or so like historically accurate, because at the end of the day, this is fiction. It's meant to entertain, and I think that we should keep that in mind, you know. That was this author's like purpose, is just to entertain us. So I don't know, like it doesn't erase the fact that yeah, the author did kind of fumble certain aspects of the book, but at the same time, this is the author's debut. This is her first book being published. Like it's the first book in like I think a trilogy, so we also need to keep that in mind. We don't know how this story is going to develop, and I think we ought to just wait and see. And she, I don't know, I saw the themes of like anti-colonialism. I don't think Ruing or the author stands for that shit. So I don't know, like everyone's gonna have their own opinion. I just saw anti-colonialism in the book. I didn't see so much romance. Obviously, there is like this romantic element to the relationship between Ruing and Anthony, but I think it's so much more than that. And I think that any romantic feelings between the two is tainted by a power imbalance, by manipulation, desperation, and just their own different goals. And obviously the whole tragedy that's unfolding in their world around them, you know. So I mean, that's that. Like I'm not gonna keep going on, like this is it. So yeah, thank you. I don't know if you got to the end of this video or what, but thank you so much if you did. Like leave a comment down below and like let me know like what you thought. What's your opinion on the book? What's your opinion on what I've said? Am I wrong? Like, I mean, obviously I'm not wrong, I'm not right. This is just my opinion. I don't think anyone's wrong, I don't think anyone's right. I think everyone's arguments and everyone's opinions have merit, and I think they're all worthy of being read, which is why I did go through a lot and read them, just to get the general consensus, and also like see what people thought. And honestly, y'all had some really good ideas and really good takes that I didn't think of during that time. And after I read it, I was like, damn, okay, they kind of got a point there, you know. So that's why I think it's important to have discourse. It's important to have these discussions and to like have an environment where we can share our opinions and not be villainized, not villainize others, and just have a fun time. We're readers, we love to read, we love to indulge ourselves in these fantasy worlds and fiction, and you know, I enjoy it. I'm pretty sure y'all do, y'all are reading it. So I don't know, I don't think we should lose sight of what's important, which is enjoyment. And really, did you enjoy the book or not, you know? And yeah, I get the fact that it's a colonizer romance or historical inaccuracies may have limited your ability to enjoy the book, but that's beyond the point. Anyways, this is it. Like I'm done. So yeah, in case you forgot, I'm Krissa, also known as your academic rival, even though you're probably smarter than me. And that's it. Like I don't know, have a good rest of your day.